It took nearly 2 decades, but at the age of 58, Dr. Joel Tudman's wife finally spoke the words that people had waited years to hear. For so long, whispers moved through church halls, behind smiles, and beneath polite laughter. Everyone thought they knew the truth, but no one really did. You won't believe what she finally revealed after years of silence. Let me tell you, this wasn't just another church story. It was something deeper, something that would leave the entire faith community stunned. In the beginning, their story looked perfect. People said they were the kind of couple that others could only dream to be. Strong in faith, united in purpose, and devoted to God and to each other. This is how everyone saw them, a true example of love, leadership, and calling. Dr. Joel Tudman was known for his passion and powerful sermons that touched thousands. His words had weight, his energy filled the room, and his followers saw him as a man chosen for greatness. But here's the shocking part. While he was inspiring the world, someone right beside him was quietly fading away. His wife had always been seen as the calm, graceful one. She smiled at events, stood beside him during services, and clapped when he preached his heart out. But very few people knew how much she had given up for that smile to stay in place. Behind those kind eyes was a woman who carried years of unspoken pain. This is where it gets interesting. She was not angry or bitter. She was simply tired. Tired of living a story that looked perfect but didn't feel that way anymore. The church loved her. They often spoke about her as the picture of a faithful wife. She's strong, they would say. She's blessed, they would add. But strength sometimes is just another word for silence. As Joel's ministry grew, bigger stages, more travel, louder applause, her world grew smaller. Nights at home became quieter. Conversations became shorter. She waited for him with dinners gone cold and prayers that felt unanswered. You won't believe how many times she told herself, this is just a season. It will get better. But destiny took an unexpected turn. That season never ended. Friends said they started noticing small changes. She no longer came to every event. She began to choose the back row instead of sitting proudly in the front. When people asked, she would smile and say, "He's got it handled." But those who looked closer could see the truth in her eyes. There was distance, not physical, but emotional. It was like two people standing in the same room but living in different worlds. What makes this story different is that she didn't leave. She didn't lash out or seek attention. She simply stayed, quietly breaking inside while keeping his image whole. Every preacher knows the sound of applause. It's powerful, addictive even. For Joel, that applause became a rhythm of life. But when the noise stopped and the lights dimmed, silence filled their home like a heavy cloud. He prayed, he preached, he built his legacy, but the woman who once felt seen by him now felt invisible. The craziest part, she never complained. She believed in his purpose so much that she forgot about her own peace. There's an unspoken rule in ministry. Keep smiling, keep showing up, and never let anyone see you fall apart. And so she did just that. She smiled through pain, through exhaustion, through loneliness. But deep down, she started wondering, was their love still as strong as it looked from the outside? Or had they become two performers in a play that never ended? This is how slow heartbreak looks. It doesn't shout. It just stays quiet long enough until one day you realize something is missing. She often sat up late at night, thinking about how they once prayed together, laughed together, dreamed together. Somewhere along the way, that togetherness turned into routine. He was the preacher the world adored, and she was the woman who cheered for him from the shadows. But behind that devotion was a quiet question that never left her heart. When was the last time he really saw me? And that's where things began to shift. The silence between them was no longer peaceful, it was painful. The ministry that had once united them now stood between them. She still loved him, but she was starting to realize that love alone couldn't fill the growing distance. You won't believe how close she was to losing herself just to keep everything looking perfect. Days turned into months, and months into years, and though the world only saw Dr. Joel Tudman's rise, his wife lived through the slow fade of connection. Let me tell you, the cracks didn't appear suddenly. They grew quietly, like lines under soft paint, almost invisible until the light hit them just right. This is how slow distance feels. You don't even realize it's there until one day you can't ignore it anymore. She had spent years being his strength, praying before every sermon, keeping the home peaceful, covering his worries with her faith. But here is the shocking part. No one ever stopped to ask who covered her. What makes the story different is that she wasn't angry at the ministry. She was simply forgotten in it. Her love had become the silent foundation under his success, and while he built his platform higher, her voice disappeared deeper into the shadows. There were nights when the house was so quiet she could hear the clock tick louder than her own breath. Joel would be out of town preaching to thousands, while she sat on their couch watching his sermons through a screen. The crowd would shout amen, the camera would zoom in on his smile, and she would whisper, "That's my husband." But the craziest part, even saying that began to feel strange because the man on the screen felt more like a public figure than the person she once shared her heart with. She had always believed that silence was a form of strength, that if she just waited, prayed, and stayed faithful, things would somehow go back to the way they used to be. But destiny took an unexpected turn. Silence, instead of protecting her marriage, began to separate them. Every time she swallowed her words, a piece of her spirit grew quieter. Every time she smiled through pain, she lost a bit more of herself. Then came the questions, the whispers that spread through the congregation. People began to notice her absence. "Why isn't she with him anymore?" they'd ask. "Is everything okay at home?" Rumors started to swirl, and though none of them knew the truth, their curiosity became another burden she carried. But this is where it gets interesting. She never denied anything. She just smiled and said, "We're fine," even when she knew they weren't. Because in her world, honesty came with a price. As Joel's fame continued to rise, his calendar filled with conferences, meetings, and endless phone calls. He preached about love and forgiveness, about how God heals broken hearts, and yet the woman sitting beside him was silently breaking a little more with each sermon. You won't believe how often she sat in the back of the church listening to his words about unity and grace, wondering if any of that love still reached their home. There were small moments that told the bigger story: missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, messages left unread because he was too busy. She told herself he was tired, that it was just ministry life, but deep down, she felt a growing ache that prayer alone couldn't fix. What makes this story different is that she wasn't looking for perfection, she was looking for presence. Sometimes late at night, she would stand by the window, watching the headlights pass by and whisper to herself, "Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow he'll call first. Tomorrow we'll sit and talk again. Tomorrow I'll feel like his wife again." But tomorrow never came. And so she stayed quiet, loyal to an image that no longer felt like love. Then came the breaking point, the night that changed everything. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it was clear. Joel had come home after another long trip, full of stories about the people he'd prayed for, the souls he'd saved, the applause he'd received. And as he talked, she just sat there listening, smiling the same soft smile she had for years. But something inside her shifted. For the first time, she wasn't proud. She was empty. He finished talking, kissed her forehead, and went upstairs, unaware that this time her silence meant something else. It meant she was done pretending. You won't believe what she decided to do next, because it was something no one saw coming. That night marked a quiet turning point, though no one realized it yet. After Joel went upstairs, she sat alone at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly together, her heart heavy, but strangely calm. For the first time in years, she wasn't crying, she wasn't praying, she was thinking. Let me tell you, this was the moment when something deep inside her finally decided enough was enough. This is how change begins, not with shouting, but with stillness. She looked around the house that once felt like a home. The framed pictures of church events, the awards, the smiling family portraits, all of them told a story that wasn't real anymore. She realized she had become part of a show, one where her role was to smile and support, even when she was breaking inside. But here's the shocking part. She didn't want revenge, and she didn't want to destroy his image. She just wanted to find herself again. Days passed, and her quietness grew heavier. Joel noticed the distance, but didn't understand it. He assumed she was tired or needed space. He didn't realize that her silence was no longer about patience, it was preparation. The craziest part, the world saw nothing different. To everyone else, they were still the perfect kingdom couple. But inside their home, love had turned into polite conversations and practiced smiles. Then, one evening, as she sat scrolling through her phone, she saw a message from a well-known Christian platform. They were inviting her to speak about the silent struggles of ministry spouses. Normally, she would have declined immediately. She had done that dozens of times before. But this time, destiny took an unexpected turn. She stared at the message for a long time, her heart pounding, her mind racing. For once, she didn't ask herself what Joel would think. She asked herself what she needed. And quietly, she said yes. She didn't tell anyone, not even him. For weeks, she carried that secret inside her heart like a small spark waiting to catch flame. You won't believe how much courage it took her to sit in front of that camera the day of the interview. Her voice trembled at first, her hands shook slightly, but as she began to speak, something changed. Years of silence began to pour out, not in anger, but in truth. She spoke softly, carefully, choosing every word with grace. I was never trying to compete with his calling, she said. I just wanted to know if there was still space for me in it. That one sentence hit like thunder. It wasn't loud, but it shook something deep in everyone who heard it. What makes this story different? She didn't accuse, she didn't expose, she simply told her truth. As the interview went on, she talked about how love can sometimes get lost in the noise of purpose, how ministry can take everything from you if you let it. She said, you can be celebrated by thousands and still feel completely alone in your own home. That line, simple yet heavy, traveled through every listener's heart like an echo. When the interview aired, the reaction was immediate. Some people praised her for being brave, calling her story a message the church needed to hear. Others criticized her, saying she should have stayed quiet, that she was hurting the ministry. But here is the shocking part. She didn't care about the comments anymore. For the first time in decades, she felt peace. Real peace. Joel saw the interview days later. Friends had sent it to him, worried about how he might react. He sat alone in his office, watching as the woman he once thought he fully knew spoke truths he had never really listened to. And when she said those words, I just wanted to know if there was still space for me in it, he froze. For the first time, he realized the weight she had been carrying. The craziest part, he wasn't angry, he was broken. This is where it gets interesting, because her voice, the one he had ignored for so long, was now being heard by millions. And while the world debated whether she was right or wrong, Joel finally did something he hadn't done in years. He listened, truly listened. The days after the interview felt strange. The world around them was loud, but inside her heart, there was a calm she hadn't felt in years. For once, she wasn't hiding behind anyone's shadow or pretending everything was fine. She had finally spoken her truth, and the silence that used to weigh her down had turned into strength. Let me tell you, that kind of freedom doesn't come easy. It's the kind you earn after years of holding your breath. Joel's phone didn't stop ringing. Messages, calls, and texts came from every direction. Some offering support, others questioning what had really happened. People wanted explanations, statements, clarity. But what makes this story different is that neither of them chose to defend themselves. There was nothing left to prove. For the first time, the man who had spent his life preaching about truth and faith was facing his own reflection. You won't believe how much that one interview changed not only their marriage, but also the way people viewed the pressure behind the pulpit. Behind closed doors, the conversation they had avoided for years finally happened. Joel walked into the same kitchen where she had once sat alone, and this time, he didn't come with words of wisdom or long sermons. He came with silence, the kind that listens. He said quietly, "I watched it." She didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, unsure if he was angry or hurt. Then he said something that made her eyes fill with tears. "I didn't realize how much I'd stopped seeing you." This is how healing begins, not with apologies alone, but with understanding. They sat there for hours, talking for the first time without walls between them. He told her how the ministry had consumed him, how the applause had blinded him from what truly mattered, and she told him how her silence had become her only way to survive. But here is the shocking part. There was no yelling, no blame, no drama, just two people finally hearing each other after years of noise. The craziest part, that interview, which everyone thought would destroy them, actually began to rebuild them. Slowly, carefully, honestly. Joel stepped back from public appearances for a while. He took time to reflect, to understand what real leadership meant, not just in church, but at home. And she, for the first time, started living for herself too. She began mentoring other women in ministry, helping them find their voice before they lost it. Destiny took an unexpected turn, and it wasn't about fame or failure anymore. It was about truth and redemption. The faith community was shaken, but it was also changed. Couples started talking more openly. Wives who had stayed silent for years began to speak up. Husbands began to listen differently. What began as one woman's story became a mirror for thousands of others who had quietly carried the same pain. You won't believe how her courage turned into a movement of healing. In one of her last public statements, she said something that stayed with everyone who heard it. Sometimes God doesn't ask you to stay silent. Sometimes he asks you to speak so others can find freedom in your truth. Those words carried more power than any sermon. And that's how their story, once wrapped in rumors and whispers, turned into a testimony of grace and growth. She had spent years believing that silence was strength, but she finally learned that real strength is found in honesty. What makes the story different is that it didn't end in scandal, it ended in understanding. So the woman who once smiled to hide her pain learned to smile because she was finally free. And the man who once preached to the world learned to listen to the one voice that mattered most. Because in the end, love doesn't die from the noise. It fades in the silence that's never broken. And when she finally broke hers, she didn't just find her voice, she found herself.